Hi, it's Richard from Intelligent Advisor IT Consulting with a little bit of a rocket ship walkthrough setting up the CheckPoint example connector, which is on the online help. So I'm assuming that you've found your way to this page and you've seen that step 1 is ensure you have the Java JDK, but step 2 is to get some source files, which you're going to download as a zip. Then we'll be doing some stuff in that file, so it also wants you to go and get some required libraries. So the required libraries, what you need actually depends on your context, whether you're using the CheckPoint only connector or whether you're using Apache or whether you're using, for that matter, WebLogic as your deployment source. But whatever you need to do, they're all fairly straightforward. Download each of the individual items as you go and prepare them in a nice folder because you're going to need them in a short while as well, whether it be Apache logging, whether it be JAX, or whether it be the other required files. So assuming you've gone through that slightly tedious but really quite easy process and you've got those files available to you, then the next thing you're going to have to do is to make sure that you've downloaded the source code, which was actually in a previous step, and opened it in your favorite code editor, such as Eclipse. So I've got all those downloaded now. I'm going to make sure that I then unzip the source code and open the source code as a workspace in Eclipse. And because I've opened it in Eclipse, well, at least I will do in just a moment, if I could spell it would help. There we go. And when I open it all in Eclipse, I will have a bunch of errors and not be able to build it. And those errors will only go away when I add the various required files to the build path, after which point, if I've done all of the necessary files into the build path, I should find myself just with a couple of warnings left over, but certainly no errors to stop me building the example source code to produce a jar file. So assuming you've been able to compile the source files into something useful without any errors, the next stage is to use your hard disk to construct, to add various folders and various files into the folders to essentially build the structure of the future WR file that you're going to use to deploy onto Tomcat or onto WebLogic. So you have to basically follow through the steps here, creating folders and subfolders on your hard disk, so that when you've done all of those additional steps, moving files into the different folders based on whatever you downloaded from the previous steps, you will then be able to take all of those files and build a WAR archive file, a WAR file out of them. So I'm just going to finish tidying up all of that and getting rid of a bunch of files, copying over a bunch of files into that file structure. And they're basically the required files that you downloaded in previous steps. So you're required to create folders, subfolders, and so on. At which point, if I've done all of that work, I can then zip it all up. And I'm using WinRAR because I want to create, it's just my choice, to create the future WAR file. Of course, I'm going to create it as a zip first, and then I'm going to go ahead and rename it as a WAR file. Once I've done that, I can then go to my WebLogic in my case. In fact, I just make sure that I get the spelling right and change the keyboard. There we go. Once I've done that, I can go to my WebLogic in my case, and I can then deploy this on my environment. And the goal, of course, is to make a new deployment on one of your active servers. Oh, I need to go and get the file, wherever the file is. I'll go to a known location. I'll go and grab the file so that I can upload it in the deployment screen of WebLogic. In fact, I'll put it somewhere where WebLogic can see it. And at which point, I hope very much that you should be able to deploy your WAR file successfully. So it's now sitting deployed on WebLogic. And you could also say that we've reached the final stages of our connector build, because we can now go to Oracle Intelligent Advisor Hub. And we can go to, first of all, make sure that I have any necessary users. I'm going to create a user for this. Sorry, this isn't really required, but let's go ahead and create this user, because I plan on making some changes to this later. So I'm going to create a new user. Okay, there's my password. I'll put in a test password. It's not temporary. Okay, so that's, sorry, a bit of a sidestep while I did that, because I'm going to need that later on. I'm going to give myself permissions to see and do everything that I need to. So now back to the plot. We need to create a new connection, and we need to call it whatever we want to call it. So I've been calling it test connector up to now. And we need to make sure that we choose the version of the API that was used to create that example, and that's specified in the documentation. I need to copy and paste the URL of my connector. You can see in the URL that it's the URL I showed you just a moment ago. Drop in my username and password. Don't forget to choose the workspace and make any necessary changes. So this is the URL that that particular connector is targeting. And that's the URL that I just showed you there. Oh, and don't forget to include the timestamp and save the connection. So now the connection is available. You can see that it's listed as online, and I'm going to go into OPM. So after all that work, we're just about ready to test our checkpoint only connector. So let's review where we are right now. In our Oracle Intelligent Advisor Hub, we have our new test connector, or checkpoint only connector, which is currently online. This is the URL that we specified. And if I move this out of the way, we can see that the web service responds as we'd expect. And equally, we're going to deploy a project now to this hub and identify and specify that that project uses checkpoints. For this, I'm going to use an example project, one called Energy Saver, which I'm sure you're familiar with. If you're not, I recommend you take a look. And I've connected myself to the very same hub, as you can see, which allows me to change the data mapping settings. So in my case, in the mapping type dialog, I chose a connector and I clicked OK. And because I'm connected to my hub, I can see the two connectors that we just saw a moment ago. I'll select the test connector, which is the checkpoint only connector. And once this has done its thing, on this screen, and this is specific to this particular checkpoint only connector, there's nothing to do because we know that our connector doesn't handle load, doesn't handle submit. So there's nothing we can do here. We can simply say OK. And then we can make sure that in the interview tab, we have enabled checkpoints. It's up to you whether you enable them on every screen or chosen screens. But the point is, if you want to be able to test them, you're going to have to enable them. And you can only enable them if you have connected to a connector that supports checkpoints, which is our case. Then we will go ahead and deploy the changes to the same hub. And we will verify in the hub that over on the deployments page, we do indeed have a deployed project with a deployment dated as of now. We will take a copy of the URL because we're going to have to create a new URL, or rather I'm going to have to update this URL to take into account the specific URL arguments that this checkpoint only connector is expecting. And I'll find these in the next steps of our checklist. So it says I need the OPA user and then a resume ID. So I'll do that. Nice little copy and paste. There we go. So the user and the resume ID. The resume ID is the checkpoint ID. So it's up to me to give a good checkpoint ID. What I do XYZ123. That's my resume ID. So I'm going to take that as well and I'm going to create a copy of it so that in a moment, when I want to, I will be able to use the resume session as well. So I can now go ahead and open this tab. And I'll launch the interview. So I'm going to walk through this interview, go through a few pages, making sure that I change the default values. So the default values here, I'm going to change those and just say I have a ceiling fan and a clothes dryer. And what else shall I put? I'll say I have ceiling fans, and I don't use a draft stopper, and have a glass door, and I don't have heavy drapes, and it is double glazed, this sort of thing. And well, I'll stop there. But obviously what we want to do is close the window and go to our resume session URL, and now see if the resume session URL picks up the checkpoint, and that we can see if it's remembered what we were doing. So the checkpoint data is being retrieved and loaded, and you'll notice we're on the previous page because I have a checkpoint on every screen, so it doesn't obviously checkpoint the last screen. But if I go back, we can see that we have yes, no, no, yes. We have yes, and we have the ceiling fan and the clothes dryer, and we have yes, I have energy saver light bulbs. So clearly the checkpoint has been used to restore the session status of the user of the interview. If you have any troubles, of course, if you go back into your Oracle Intelligent Advisor Hub, you can always go to the message log and keep an eye out for any message logs that might be pertinent to your issue. This is a non-pertinent message about the other connection, but this might help you understand if you've forgotten something along the way in your configuration. So there we have it. We have the ability now to use this connector, which only handles set checkpoint and get checkpoint, to successfully demonstrate how checkpoints affect the user experience of a resumed interview. I hope you enjoyed watching all of this, and I'll see you again soon on intelligentadvisor.com. Bye-bye.